Hi, this is Math with Mrs. Albright, and tonight what we're going to be working on is learning how to add decimals by converting them into fraction form, since we've already mastered that skill. So the first problem that we're going to be working on is 3/10 plus 57 hundredths. So in order to add these up, we can convert these into fraction form and add them that way. So here we have 3/10. I can convert that into fraction form. And 57 hundredths, I'm going to go ahead and convert that into fraction form. And if you remember when we learned how to add fractions, we can never add fractions unless the denominators are the same. But it's pretty easy to turn tenths into hundredths. All I have to do is turn these 3/10 into 30 hundredths. Now I can add these amounts up. So 50 plus 30 is 87 hundredths. So to rewrite that as a decimal, our answer for this problem up here is 87 hundredths, 8/10 and 7 hundredths. So that's one example of how we can add decimals by converting them into fractions. The next example is a little more challenging, and you will see why in just a moment. We have 5/10 plus 64 hundredths. So again, I can use the same method, convert them into fraction form so that I can add them up. 5/10 plus 64 hundredths. Now I need to convert my tenths into hundredths so that my denominators are the same, and I know that 5/10 is equal to 50 hundredths. And then when I add these up, 50 plus 64, 6 plus 5 is 11, so I end up with 114 hundredths. So as a fraction, this is an improper fraction. We could convert that into a mixed number. This is greater than 1, which is what makes it different than the first example we looked at. To write this as a decimal, I need to think about how many wholes are in this fraction, and it is 1 whole. And then I have 1/10 and 4 hundredths, or 14 hundredths left over. That's what this would look like if I turned it into a mixed number, 1 and 14 hundredths. Next example is where we are starting with decimals that are greater than 1 whole. So I have 6 and 8/10 plus 5 and 7/10. So if I want to add those up, again, I can turn them into fraction form. I can say 6 and 8/10 plus 5 and 7/10. And since both of these fractions are already tenths, I don't have to convert them into anything else. I can go ahead and add them as is. So 8 plus 7, I end up with 15/10. And then when I add my whole numbers, I end up with 11 wholes. Now this is an improper fraction. So again, I want to convert this into a mixed number. I want to decompose this improper fraction. So this improper fraction is really 1 whole and 5/10. I want to put that 1 whole together with the 11 wholes that I already had. So my final answer is 12 and 5/10. And if I'm rewriting that as a decimal, I have 12 wholes and 5/10. That's my answer when I write it as a decimal. So the next step to understanding how to add decimals is to be able to do this with a place value chart. So our next example that we're going to look at, I have 3 and 5/10 plus 2 and 49 hundredths. And we want to add these decimals up. I can convert them into fractions, 3 and 5/10 plus 2 and 49 hundredths. This I would have to change to 50 hundredths. Okay, but instead of doing all this converting from decimals to fractions and back to get our final answer, if we use a place value chart, we can add these up just as decimals. So I'm going to create a place value chart that has a spot for my hundredths my tenths, and my ones. And my decimal point would go right there. So here I have two add-ins. I have 3 and 5/10, and I have 2 and 49/100. So in order to put 3 and 5/10 on this place value chart, I need to think about my whole. I have 3 wholes or 3 ones, and I have 5/10. Now my next number, 2 and 49/100, I want to put that in the appropriate columns on my place value chart. I have 2 wholes, and I have 4/10, and I have 9/100. Now we can add these up. You'll notice that I don't have any value right here. I could fill this in with a 0. And essentially what I've done is turn it into fraction form, and I've made that 50/100. I can look at this all as 50/100 instead of just the 5/10. And that makes it easier to add. So now I've got 9/100. 5 plus 4 is 9. I have 9/10. And I have 5 and 99/100. That would be my final answer for this problem. One of the mistakes that's really easy to make when students see problems like this, 3 and 5/10 plus 2 and 49/100, they just want to add them up like this. And they end up adding their tenths with their hundredths, their ones with their tenths. It's really important that you stick to the place value chart so that you understand that this is really 5/10 or 50/100, and that decimal point needs to be lined up. So one last example before you get a chance to practice this on your own, and that is the decimals 5 and 6/10 plus 4 and 53/100. We need to add these up. Again, you can convert them into fraction form, or you can use the place value chart. Eventually, we want to be able to just rewrite these without having to use a place value chart and knowing how to stack up our decimals. So my first add-in, I have 5 ones, and I have 6/10. I could kind of convert that as a fraction in my mind and think of it as 60/100 and go ahead and fill in that 0 here. My second add-in, I have 4 wholes, 5/10, and 3/100, and I want to add that up. Now, if I were just rewriting this as a vertical addition problem, 5 and 6/10, I need to line up all my place values. So when I start writing this number 4 and 53/100, I need to make sure that 4 ones lines up with my 5 ones from my first add-in, and that my 5/10 line up with the 6/10 from my first add-in. And then I have these 3/100 over here. And that's why I can fill that in with the 0, and I can add these up. So I want you to go ahead and add this problem up. Give me your final answer. And then your last practice problem, 3 and 5/10 plus 4 and 72/100. I want you to add that as well. And make sure you bring your questions back to class. Have a great time. I will see you soon.